We're going to go ahead and move into our final question and answer sessions. And the first question we have is about cohort activities. So Jesse, I know you talked about the cohort activities on the Canals Fellowship. Do any of the other fellowships include these type of activities? So I'll throw that out there to Jessica, Jeff, and Christina.
As far as the NSF GRFP goes, the cohorts are rather large, so there are not any 1 week long cohort experiences offered by the program right now.
This is Jessica. In the past, the USGS has held a sort of 1 day Mendenhall, I forget what we've called it, extravaganza, a short meeting in which Mendenhalls can present their past research and what they intend to be doing. We sort of do lightning talks and things like that. Because we've had our Mendenhall program suspended for a couple of years for various issues, it's been a while since we've had one, but I think there's enough interest that we would still do something like that. So you would get funding to fly to whatever place it was being held and meet your fellow Mendenhall fellows.
And Jeff, what about the NASA Fellowship?
Yeah, it's different for every center and every group within that center. For example, I'm part of the Mars group, so we'll have a weekly meeting of there's about 20 of us to discuss Mars research, but it's going to vary from center to center.
Great, thanks for those responses. Got a question here about the coronavirus. So can you talk about the COVID-19 impacts on these opportunities for this application cycle and potentially for next year's activities? Do you foresee any, say, delays in application deadlines or extension of project timelines? How should people prepare for potential impacts to these opportunities?
This is Jessica again. I guess I can start. As far as the timelines go, I believe the deadlines for the various projects are not changing, since it's all online, and a lot of the communication with your potential advisors will be, usually email or phone calls. The USGS as a whole is basically teleworking right now, so we're trying to continue whatever activities we can. A lot of our summer field work is being delayed or rescheduled or in some cases canceled until the next fiscal year until we have a better idea of what's going on. But there is a lot of support for people getting into lab spaces and doing work as much as they can. So there are accommodations. We do have plans in place to do that. We do have a couple of Mendenhalls coming in over the summer, and there's some questions of whether they will try and continue as their schedule permits or whether they'll delay their arrival. But basically, once you have accepted the Mendenhall, you have some flexibility on when you start. Sometimes it needs to be before the end of the fiscal year, which is October. But beyond that, there's a lot of flexibility in dealing with things like this. So whatever it is, we will work out what we can.
Yeah, this is Jeff. With NASA, they're being pretty conservative about reopening. Right now, we're 90% teleworking, and 10% of people supporting mission critical activities. Like the International Space Station is controlled from Johnson Space Center, where I am. They have to work to keep the astronauts safe. As far as the NPPs, I'm able to telework, but all of us have a lab component and or a fieldwork component, and without access to the labs, we can't complete our projects. And we can elect to go on leave. So or go part-time. So if I go to part-time for 2 months, then they can add a month at the end of my term. But beyond that, it's a period of great uncertainty, and I would contact the potential advisor and see what they say about it.
This is Christina. As far as the NSF GRFP is concerned, I'm not aware of any changes to upcoming deadlines, but I would just recommend paying attention to the program solicitation that's released this summer and go from there. I imagine the fellowship probably won't be impacted since this is all online and it's graduate funding and not necessarily specific to a project you're proposing to do.
This is Jessie, and for the Canals Fellowship, as far as I'm aware, it sounds like everything is still moving forward with the fellows for next year and the evaluations of the applications. All of the fellows currently this year right now are all teleworking from their respective agencies, and so everybody is still working, just in a different capacity through telework. But it's another component that I mentioned is big for this fellowship is there's a lot of network and travel capabilities. So right now fellows are trying to learn how to navigate new networking opportunities virtually, as well as virtual conferences and virtual ways to present their work versus in person. So people are still adapting, but the fellowship is still moving forward. So it would still be great for people to apply as well.
Great, thanks for those answers, everyone. We do have quite a few students online, and one question coming in from some of the undergraduates is, what advice would you give for undergraduate students who are really interested in these fellowship opportunities? What advice would you have for them to prepare so that they can be successful applicants in the future? What activities, what types of experiences, what types of coursework and co-curricular activities should they look at pursuing?
This is Christina. So for me personally, I started volunteering with a wide range of different labs and nonprofits when I was an undergraduate. And I think these experiences were super critical to helping me kind of go down the pathway that I did. I actually started in marine biology and I've ended up in hydrology and biogeochemistry. So really, I think by volunteering with so many different types of labs and doing all kinds of research that spans, coastal systems, freshwater systems, it really helped me hone in on like what I wanted to do with my graduate program and future.
This is Jeff. For undergrads, there are NASA grants available, and they're run by each state. Like I got the Oregon NASA Space Grant when I was an undergrad, and that was something that set me on my path and made me realize that you actually can study Mars and make a living. So I would look into something like that, and it's also a good way to see if it's if the NASA world is something that you're interested in.
This is Jessie. As I mentioned earlier, I would say an important component for the Canals Fellowship is leadership experience. So as an undergrad, if there's any way to get leadership experience within your university or within your community, I would highly recommend that as a important skill to learn and have experience with. And again, I would highlight reaching out to your state Sea Grant programs, learning if there's ways that you can volunteer, if you can do outreach with them. Sea Grant does a lot of outreach components. So getting involved with Sea Grant early as an undergrad and then through grad school would be very helpful.
And this is Jessica. I'll just add a little bit at the end. The USGS itself actually has undergraduate internships. There's something called a Pathways program, which helps place undergraduate students as basically interns that are paid on a part-time basis for work at USGS facilities. So if there are any near you, if that's feasible, you can get in touch with people who are maybe interested in bringing on a Pathways intern. In general, I would say that if you're an undergrad still, take any opportunity you can to practice your writing, especially if you have a an introduction to how to do research class of some kind. I had that in undergrad, and that was really immensely useful for me. I also had an NSF Fellowship, GRFP Fellowship, and having that class in my junior year of undergrad made me a much better writer when it came to applying for things like the GRFP. So yeah, practice that as much as you can, and prepare yourself to be an independent researcher. That's sort of a skill you need to learn for graduate school in general, but for any of these, you have to be able to take responsibility for yourself and for your project. So that's really important.
Right, and just to add, there's actually another opportunity available to undergraduates specifically through National Science Foundation. It's the NSF Research Experience for undergraduates, and I highly recommend looking into that. Those are summer internships basically all over the US, and they're paid, and they're awesome opportunities to get your foot in the door at different institutions and learn new skills in a wide variety of science disciplines.
Really quickly, that reminds me that NASA also has summer internships for undergrads, and also the Lunar and Planetary Institute runs them. So those are really great things for undergrads.
Great, thanks everyone. Sounds like there's a lot of wonderful opportunities out there, especially for undergraduates. Another question we have is, I know a few of you talked about this during your presentations, but we have some questions coming in about citizenship requirements for these opportunities, as well as what about eligibility for students, US students who are enrolled internationally. Can you touch on that just briefly for your fellowships?
Sure, this is Jessica, I can start. I mentioned in the presentation that in general, to be a Mendenhall Fellow, you have to be a US citizen. It's very rare that a foreign student gets the fellowship. However, if you are going to attending a foreign university, that shouldn't be a problem. You'll just need to be able to prove to the satisfaction of our HR people that you are getting a degree that's equivalent to a PhD in the US.
For the NSF GRFP, first, if you have eligibility questions, I really recommend checking out the NSF frequently asked questions website. It has over 50 answers to really unique situations that you might find yourself in. But in general, you have to be a US citizen or a US national or a permanent resident at the time of application. And your institution that you're proposing has to be US based, as far as I'm aware.
This is Jessie. And as I had mentioned previously about the Canals Fellowship, applicants do not have to be US citizens, but I want to point out, as I mentioned, some host offices won't accept foreign nationals as fellows. So that's something important to keep in mind. But if you are a student, a US citizen, but in a foreign country and you don't know what Sea Grant office to contact, again, I would recommend going onto the National Sea Grant website and letting them know your interest and see what Sea Grant you should touch base with.
Great, thanks everyone. Got a question here from some graduate students. Is there a good time, like what is the best time during your graduate studies to apply for these opportunities? First year, second year, while you're in your master's program? Do you have any advice on what that optimum time is, and maybe when is it too late?
I guess for the Mendenhall Fellowship, I can give a quick answer. You're going to be applying for this at the end of your PhD. So you have to have your PhD in hand by the time you start the fellowship. So the start date is a little flexible, but you've got to be, probably within that last year.
That's the same for the NASA postdoc program. And another restriction is I don't think that you can apply if you've already been a postdoc for 5 years.
For the NSF GRFP, you can't apply past your second year of graduate school, and there are eligibility situations that change if you have a master's degree. And so I really just recommend looking into, where you are at in your graduate program. If you have a master's degree currently, I think there's rules about taking 2 gap years off before you can actually apply for, if you were to apply again during your PhD. Otherwise, I recommend taking advantage of applying while you're still an undergraduate so that you do get a second opportunity if you need it.
And this is Jessie. For the Canals Fellowship, you can apply any year of graduate school. You just have to be a current fellow. So, I had finished, I was wrapping up my master's when I applied, and I had just finished my master's right before I started the fellowship. But some people are doing their master's still, or wrapping up their master's, or doing their PhD. I would recommend having that conversation with your advisors and, understanding I have the capability to work on my dissertation while I am a fellow, but I might not be able to get as much work done as I wanted. So just be realistic and have a conversation with your advisor to see when would be the best time for you potentially to apply for the Canals Fellowship. Quite a few fellows this year have actually just defended their dissertation. So that can be a lot of work to defend and also start a job at a new place. So just keep in mind what might work best for you.
Thanks, everyone. Got one or two more questions we can take. One is about, and Jessie, I know you talked about this quite a bit, so I'm going to throw this out to everyone. What's the top quality that you found that reviewers look for in their successful applicants?
I think for the NPP, they really look at your research record, and that you've demonstrated that you can do projects. And like a big way of doing that is by getting peer-reviewed journal articles published. So if you can get 1 or 2 while you're a PhD and have at least 1 or 2 first authored papers, and be a co-author on as many other papers as you can, that demonstrates that you can carry out a project from start to finish yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jeff. For the NSF GRFP, I think reviewers really want to see that the projects you're proposing and that the experience that you translate through your statements is credible. And the best way to show credibility is from past experience, demonstrated past experience. So if that's something you don't have a lot of right now, it's a great time to start building your research experience and your outreach experience so that you have a better chance of a successful application.
This is Jessica. I would say that for the USGS, what the reviewers really want to see is not only that you're a good researcher and that you've, you can think for yourself when coming up with this project, but that you are going to serve the goals of the USGS. That's why they specifically have the mission statements included in the guidelines for each particular project. They want ideally to find somebody who, if they choose to stay, will fit the mission. And that's not very hard for a lot of these things, but if you're someone who's only sort of just sort of done research for the sake of doing research, or because you were handed a project by an advisor, you'll have to start thinking in terms of the greater good and how you're going to be serving the people who are paying for your research.
Great, thank you, everyone. Well, that's about all we have time for today for questions. So thanks, everyone, for all the great questions today. If you have any questions that were not addressed today, you can always email them to us at webinars@americangeosciences.org, and we'll make sure to send your questions along to our speakers. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.